And with that, we want to get down to the subject at hand because, you know, this topic of law and order has been something that's been talked about a lot all over the country. And certainly here in our community, it's a topic that kind of keeps popping up more and more. So we really are happy to be able to do a program today that focuses on the issues of law and order. And to facilitate that is Ryan Hatfield. Here's the great thing. We're doing a podcast that I host, but I don't have to do anything more from here on out. It's all in Ryan's capable hands. So Ryan and the panel, if you would come forward, and they'll take seats up here on the stage, and we'll hear what they have to say on the topic. You go, Ryan.
Thank you, Johnny, and thanks for everybody for coming out. If we could have the sheriff and judge and prosecutor come up. Very happy to facilitate this conversation about law and order and the community. And so have a seat wherever you'd like, and we'll get started here. Very mindful of being here over the lunch hour, so we'll have this discussion and about where we stand in the community in regard to law and order and kind of where we're headed. And so grateful for the panelists today. On the far left here, we have Winston Lynn, who is the Chief Deputy Prosecutor in the Vanderburgh County Prosecutor's Office. I spent several years in the prosecutor's office and know this job to be a big one, to be an important one, both in administering the office, ensuring that the employees are taken care of. I can tell you that having prosecutors in the room, I hear good things from the environment in the prosecutor's office today and where they feel like they are headed. But also, he doesn't just do administrative work. He also handled a recent murder trial and other work in the office. Winston Lynn is here on behalf of his boss and the chief prosecutor in this county, Diana Merce, who was sworn into office in January of 2023 after being elected the first woman in Vanderburgh County. History to hold the office of prosecutor. Prior to being elected Vanderburgh County prosecutor, Merce, as well as Winston, served as in the government litigation section for the Indiana Attorney General, which is the largest of the litigation sections in the Attorney General's office. We also have the Honorable Les Shively. Appreciate Judge Shively being with us today. Vanderburgh County Superior Court Chief Judge, appointed to the bench by former Governor Mitch Daniels in 2013, and during his judicial tenure has presided over family court, the mental health court, civil litigation matters. I appear in front of Judge Shively often, and the county is very lucky to have somebody who is smart, willing to follow the law, and dispenses justice fairly. Prior to his appointment, Judge Shively worked for 30 years as a private practice attorney, including at Shively & Associates. His legal career included an 18-year tenure as general counsel for the Evansville Area Association of Realtors and positions for local government offices in Vanderburgh and Warwick counties. To my immediate left is somebody well known in the community, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, Sheriff Noah Robinson, who is a Newburgh native and attended University of Southern Indiana, where he received his associate's and bachelor's degrees, and has been serving as a police or sheriff's deputy since 1999. Sheriff Robinson became a field training deputy in 2003 and spent 8 years assigned to motor patrol. In 2009, the sheriff was promoted to the rank of sergeant and spent the next 5 years assigned to the professional standards unit, where he developed policy and procedure for the agency, as well as conducting internal investigations. The sheriff was elected in November of 2022 and has been serving since January of 2023. And I will tell you that this sheriff has taken it upon himself to ensure that the sheriff's office works well with the other agencies in the county, and the relationships the sheriff's office has with the court and the other law enforcement agencies is as good as it's been in a really long time. He deserves a lot of credit for that. So please welcome the panel. I'd like to start kind of just with a topic that I think we're seeing in the media quite frequently and is concerning residents. In fact, I got a call about it yesterday of folks really concerned about violent crime. Violent crime is up in Vanderburgh County in this decade, as it is in many places across the country. Sheriff, what are some of the primary factors for the increase in violent crime, and what are you seeing as one of some of the primary drivers in violent crime?
Appreciate the question. Yeah, we are experiencing elevated levels of violent crime, but I think it's important to kind of keep it in perspective. We saw a high level, a peak, the highest level we've ever seen back in 2022. We had 24 homicides, which is a lot for a city of our size. But it's important to keep things in the long view and perspective. You know, when I first started, it was not unusual for the city of Evansville and Vanderburgh County to average around 4 to 7 homicides a year. And certainly for the county, we'd work our maybe 1 homicide a year, and the city would work all the rest. But these things tend to ebb and flow. And if you look at it in terms of cycles within cycles, we saw enormous amounts of crime back in the 1970s, and then a dip, and then a peak again in the late 80s and early 90s. And then another dip. And so you can have smaller movements within larger movements. So what does a law enforcement agency do? Well, in short, we take credit whenever crime goes down, and then when crime goes up, we say, well, we need more resources, it's beyond our control. And so we tried to have it both ways, kind of like presidents and gas prices, right? When they take credit when the price goes down, and then when it goes up, it's not our fault, they're beyond our control. But I through our partnership with the Evansville Police Department, I feel like we are truly making some inroads into addressing some of the root causes of crime. And I applaud the efforts of the Evansville Police Department to do their crime reduction program, which involves identifying those folks who are most likely to commit violent crime, those who their street crimes unit has identified as folks who are running with the kind of crowd that they call group violence. Oftentimes it's gang violence, neighborhood beefs. And so we see different kinds of crime, primarily being neighborhood beefs, honor killings, some drug-related. And so identifying those folks who are running in those kind of circles and putting them on notice that they're being watched, and then going after those individuals most likely to commit those kind of crimes. And so the sheriff's office is partnering with the EPD. We'll be moving somebody in to their street crimes unit. I am not content to sit back and focus solely on the areas outside of the incorporated limits of Vanderburgh County. And so treating the county as a whole system, it's all interrelated, and making sure that we're providing the Evansville Police Department with every asset that we can, because we know it affects the whole county.
Prosecutor Lynn, what factors are the prosecutors seeing in violent crime, and what's your office seeing as far as who's committing violent crime, and what can we do to start to curtail it in the community?
Thank you, Ryan. I think that's a great question in terms, in addition to what Sheriff Robinson just said, there are peaks and ebbs, right? During COVID, we saw historic highs. And last year we saw, for example, murders dipped pretty low. I do think that is in part due to the efforts of our law enforcement, our prosecutors, and our judiciary. It's all key factors in preventing more violent crime and making sure that we pursue justice for those who did commit those crimes. So it's all about partnership. And one of the things that when I came down to Evansville, I really noticed was that how united we are in our purpose here with law enforcement, the judiciary, and the prosecutor's office, how united we are in this purpose to make the community safer. There's really no infighting. There's nothing like that in larger cities or anything like that where we get in each other's way. We really don't. We work collaboratively. We talk to each other all the time. Sheriff Robinson and I, we joke around as normal people, and I think that's really valuable because we see each other as real people as well, who work a hard job and have to do their jobs with limited resources and just tons of man hours put into the job. Violent crime is critically important to the prosecutor's office. It is one of those things where we see the impact on victims. We have a victims advocate section who work with the victims, and we see daily basis, how much it affects not just them, but their families, and just the ripple effects of how everyone feels less safe, more vulnerable. less apt to see other people as human beings because of that. And so, as Sheriff Robinson noted, the EPD has a tremendous role in this, as well as the Sheriff's Department, in partnering together to form the Joint Task Force. And more recently, we have obtained a $700,000 grant to form a crime gun intelligence center. So gun violence is incredibly dangerous, right? It's very incredibly lethal. And so we've, to its point, I think earlier, we're about more, what law enforcement is trying to do, I think, now, is more targeted approach, as opposed to being more reactive, right? We can say there's violence, we can say here's all these people who are doing these crimes and shooting people, but what we found and what the research supports is that it's not everyone. It is a very focused group of target of the population. And our goal now is, with the grant and with the support of the Sheriff's Office and the EPD, I have to do a throw out to Chief Phil Smith and Deputy Chief Nathan Hassler, is putting those resources to bear specifically on gun crimes and violent crimes, and those people who are more apt than normal member of society, including gang-related, including people coming from Chicago and other parts of the country, to come here to this area, including in having access to lots of guns to commit violent crimes. And we're dedicated towards preventing that. I think last year was a good sign, and we're doing more this year as well.
I thought what you started with there about kind of having a united front, I've always believed that the court has a role in making sure that the community not only has a fair and just justice system, but also ensuring that we recognize crime and in helping ensure that this is a community where people want to live. As part of that effort, Judge Shively, you've kind of taken upon yourself to create and move forward the mental health court in Vanderburgh County. Tell us about the mental health court, your role, and the role you see that the mental health court plays in the local criminal justice system.
Well, I got involved because I was at the time I was asked to supervise mental health court, I was the most junior judge, and what they say, things roll downhill. So Magistrate Markham had started this program which dealt mainly with misdemeanor offenders. We wanted to expand it to deal with low-level felony offenders. And we did, thanks to the help of a lot of people. Let me tell you what mental health court's all about. It's not about giving somebody a free ride or a ticket to get out of jail. It's a reality. Most of your crimes that are committed out there are not violent crimes, they're low-level felonies and misdemeanors. And many of these people commit these crimes because they have undiagnosed mental health issues. That's a driving force committing a lot of these crimes. And what we do in our program, if you qualify, if you have a diagnosable mental health condition, and you are agreeable to voluntarily get in this program, you enter into a plea agreement where you plead guilty to the crime charge, and if you successfully complete the program, the charges are dismissed or greatly reduced. But you got to complete the program. And we've got 70% of the people in our program since 2014 have completed. And the good news is, when they get done, they're a lot less likely to offend, and our numbers show that. And the nice thing about it, from the sheriff's standpoint, to be in our program, they got to be out of jail, so they're not being housed by the sheriff. So it's a win-win proposition. I think so far it's worked very well. The county council, for the first time, is considering providing funding for our program. At this point in time, we get grants, and we have a lot of people that volunteer, like Mark Foster volunteers as a public defender. But the county council met with a council member yesterday. Looks like we're going to get some serious funding. So things are moving in the right direction.
And the city council several years back committed significant dollars, millions of dollars, to mental health in the community. And so I know that it's been a focus. But what some folks I think may not realize, because prosecutors are often seen as folks in the courtroom sending folks off to jail, is you all play an integral role in the mental health court. Winston, can you tell us a little bit about what you view as the prosecutor's role in referring folks to mental health court, and then your participation in it?
Yes. So we do have mental health court. We also have drug treatment court. We have veterans court. We have several, as I mentioned, courts where we can divert people who we think have a condition or a background that supports not going through the normal judicial system perhaps, but a system that will more appropriately address both what they suffer from and what they need going forward. And I think the point is well taken, that the justice system is not necessarily all about punishment, right? It is about rehabilitation. It is about making sure that people can make mistakes, but then they make something out of it, right? They learn a lesson from it and they move on. They remain or become productive members of society. They help everyone else. I think that is, perhaps the ideal, perhaps, right? I think that's what the courts do, and the office does play a huge role of that. So we do have prosecutors dedicated to those courts who understand what benefits and programs are available to people who come into the system with certain drug addictions, veterans. They can have a tough time. Certain mental conditions, right? Those are all important factors in determining whether they're appropriate for the system and what they can get out of it, right? We are trying to hold them accountable for their actions, but in perhaps a way that better addresses their needs and how they can recover. That said, we're not taking the most dangerous people or people who are likely to recommit or anything like that. The judges and our prosecutors and also everyone else who's involved with those courts. I want to give a shout out to Judge Trockman and Magistrate Judge Emily Kemper, who I know with James Doyle and our drug treatment court, do a fantastic job in terms of determining where they can go, right? There's a better way for them to do that. And again, not the worst of the worst, where these are more people who can and we hope or can be rehabilitated. And going to that, I think it is crucial that there's a partnership between the courts, right? Because there's a trust. There's a trust that we're not just sending people off to do very light duty and then they go back and recommit. We do take every case seriously, and if we do see a pattern, right, we will take harsher action if needed. And also, I think that goes to law enforcement too, is that we trust them to do their jobs and to reflect, in terms of the population, who needs help, who needs to be, the more dangerous folks, who needs jail time or prison time. And whenever we can, we do. But at the end of the day, we are there to hold people accountable. And I think that's the core concern, is to help the society, the community as a whole. And sometimes that does lead to treatment court, and sometimes it doesn't. So.
And Sheriff, I know that through your campaign and certainly since you've taken office, you've talked a lot about mental health and its role in the criminal justice system. I know you have some exciting things happening out at the jail and in your department. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing to further the work in the mental health space, and I think you have a new wing maybe coming.
Yeah, we do. So we've got a lot going on at the Sheriff's Office right now. I've got a camera installed there. I hope to be able to live stream it at some point, showing the construction of the new facility. But it presented certain opportunities to rethink the way we conduct incarceration in Vandenberg County. And so luckily council backed my play on this and allowed me to construct a mental health wing of the new facility. And we also, in addition to having a 10-bed or 10-suite mental health unit, we'll have a substance abuse unit where we can cater to folks' needs who are willing to go through our programming, and adequate classroom space to have substance abuse treatment come into the facility on a daily basis. And then we're pursuing state and local funding for a peer support program to have actual peer counselors embedded inside the jail. And so when someone comes in with an addiction, which we know from our own statistics that roughly 80% have an addiction problem when they come in the facility, we are in effect the largest housing, we house more substance abuse, folks undergoing substance abuse than anybody else, just by virtue of our size. And we know that so often that substance abuse is commingled with crime and criminal activity. And so getting those folks paired with the peer support counselor immediately upon intake, and then having sufficient reentry support upon their release, I think only flows as we've seen in other counties that have done programs like this. They've seen corresponding reductions in their jail population. And so I've never been one to subscribe to the idea that you can arrest your way out of crime. I believe ultimately that is a self-defeating manner of criminal justice, because when you could build 2,000 beds and we could fill them all up, but then you'd have you'd have 2,000 parents that aren't parenting to their children, so those kids will have fewer life chances, and as a result, they'll probably fall or may fall into patterns of criminality. And then when are you going to lock them up too? And so it's this compounding problem. So this, and believe me, I would never advocate for not arresting somebody who needs to go to jail. And as Winston alluded to earlier, there's some folks that just aren't going to fit for these programs. Fine, lock them up. I have to be judicious in who we pick to do this, as does Judge Shively does with treatment court. Not everyone's eligible. But for those who have the capacity and the willingness and demonstrate the willingness to change, let's give them a shot. And let's see what happens. And if they don't come back, that's great. That's what we want. We want them paying their taxes, paying their child support, so that we can prevent the next generation of criminal coming up. And so if you've got a substance abuse problem or a mental health issue, I would much rather have that problem be dealt with while you're inside our facility or transferred to treatment court to have your problem dealt with there, than continuing this revolving door of folks just coming back into the building and never really addressing the root cause of much of the criminality, which is a mental health issue or substance abuse.
Judge, I think the sheriff led us to a really interesting place there, which is the co-occurring disorders of mental illness and drug addiction. They so often are seen together and present themselves together. Families often don't know whether to treat one or the other, or whether it's mental illness or drug addiction, and oftentimes they may be in the dark about one, and oftentimes drug use is what is presented in an outward fashion, but oftentimes it's mental illness. You have to see this so often in the mental health court. How does the mental health court treat co-occurring disorders, and what resources are available for folks dealing with that?
Well, everybody in our program, once they're admitted, are regularly drug tested. And if in fact we believe they have a serious drug problem, we may refer them to drug court as opposed to keeping in our mental health court. We're fortunate in this community to have some very nice rehab facilities in close proximity. But it's really tough in our court to deal with these dual diagnoses, because you got a mental health issue, you also have a drug issue. They're self-medicating. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, it's a very, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. Before I leave this topic, I want to say one thing about Winston here and about the sheriff. As a judge, I'm in the unique position to watch people in Winston's office and the sheriff's people on a daily basis. I want to tell you folks, the sheriff's office is charged constitutionally with the security of our courthouse. And last year there were over 300, maybe close to 600 weapons that were confiscated. And we're not just protecting us, protecting people that use our civic center. They do a marvelous job without overreaching. They're very professional. And I get to work with these people every day. Winston is an incredible attorney. Not only is he bright, and not only a very tough prosecutor, but I saw another side of him back in November. We had this 70-year-old eyeball witness to a murder. The state had to call her as a witness, even though, because we had this Sixth Amendment rule about being able to confront your accusers. And Winston handled the examination of this little girl. I wish you could have seen it. He was so gentle, and yet she testified magnificently, all because Winston showed his softer side. But again, I'm a very lucky person. I get to work with these people every day, and I see what great parts of their public service they are.
I just have to throw in, thank you so much, Judge Shively, for recognizing my softer side. But no, there's an absolute truth to what Judge Shively just said, and I really want to just highlight something that he said. There are a lot of victims in our community who don't have the opportunity to speak out. They don't. The criminals get to pick the person, the place, the time for their acts of violence and other crimes. And the victims, it's hard. I'm not trying to speak for them necessarily, but in terms of prepping them, encountering them, helping them to speak out, it is truly hard on them, especially the child victims that Judge Shively referred to. Is that child molestation is a grave problem in our society. And one case is too many, truly. These kids, they've gone through the worst. And we are asking them to relive their hardest time, their nightmares, in front of people, in front of their accuser, the person who abused them. And this little girl was magnificent. She encountered her parents being killed, and basically in front of her, and she was able to still identify the person who murdered her parents last year during that trial. And that truly was one of those moments where I felt the majesty of our job and how important it is that we pour resources into our job to help the victims that can't speak for themselves be able to go in court and say, this happened to me, this person did that to me, and they say it, but we say it, they should be put away. So, and we need judges, of course, to allow us to do that in a fair, impartial manner that will survive appeal and make sure that the person stays in prison for a long time. Thank you.
I think too, Winston, that's so important to identify the victim, and you so eloquently talked about the ripple effects of that the victim is not just the child or the person that's harmed or the homeowner whose home was broken into, but the family of that person and the loved ones of that person, and how the loved ones of a victim hurt too. And we see this so often ripple throughout the community, and certainly one of the things that we hear a lot about are sex crimes, but also drug use. And I think that, Sheriff, thinking about the addiction side of this, we seem to have certain drugs that have kind of their time in the spotlight, if you will. Waves of increased use of a certain drug. A decade ago, this part of the country was known as the meth capital of the world, and then we heard a lot about spice and K2 and synthetics, and more recently it seems that we hear more about opioids and xylazine and heroin. What are we doing to combat the culture of drug use? And certainly, more specifically, let me ask, we're seeing double the amount of heroin and fentanyl come across the southern border. The drug trafficking organizations are moving these drugs in larger quantities than ever before across the southern border from Mexico into major metropolitan areas like Houston, Atlanta, San Diego, and then from those big cities moving them into communities like ours. And into Vanderburgh County. We've certainly seen an increase of fentanyl and heroin overdoses, but those are coming through the southern border and coming from other states. What are we doing to stop drugs from getting into the community, preventing them from moving from Atlanta or Houston or San Diego into the Vanderburgh County area? And then what are we doing once we got here? I know you mentioned the Joint Task Force. Tell us a little bit about our efforts to curtail the drugs coming into the county.
I could get up here and give the standard line that, we're fighting hard in the war on drugs, but it's a cliche at this point. Is there a war on drugs? I think it's a poor analogy. Because we're losing, there is a war, we're losing that war. We have been losing that war for a long time. As long as the human condition exists, there will always be a desire for folks to take illegal drugs to numb whatever pain that they're experiencing in their lives. And so I do believe in strong drug enforcement. I don't think that the solution is just to give up. And so we have increased the number of individuals we have serving in our Joint Narcotics Task Force. And we have deputies assigned to the DEA task force as well to make sure that we have more of a national reach. That way, if someone takes an unexplained trip to Texas for a day, they probably weren't down there to see the Alamo. They were probably down there to bring something back from the border. And so being intelligent and communicating with our fellow law enforcement agencies, both state, local, and federal, and bring some situational awareness to that, it helps us intercept a lot of packages that are coming in. And so we have a wonderful partnership with the Evansville Police Department and our DEA, local DEA agents, and they all work out of the same building. And so we have a great ability to do significant drug enforcement, and we're taking down drug dealers every day of the week. But I'm not naive enough to think that you can, as I said earlier, arrest your way out of this problem. And so we tackle it from a multifaceted approach. I believe strongly in our school resource program. And there are school resource programs in this country that have failed, where the schools simply don't want or think it's inappropriate to have sheriff deputies or police officers in schools. I, for one, think that If you have a school that doesn't want cops in it, then I'll show you a school resource program that was not properly run. Our deputies are beloved members of the faculty practically in our schools, and they have great relationships with kids. And it's not to encourage fellow students to snitch on one another, but it's to set a good example and to build those relationships so that kids see the right way to behave, and that the cops should be looked at as role models. And I do strongly believe that in the absence of parents, and let's face it, there are so many kids out there that have poor parenting, and they've never been shown the right way to live. We have to step up when we can and provide proper role models. And that means being able to support those kids in school and take action whenever you've got some kid trying to bring drugs into the school. But it's not just one solution. And unfortunately, I would love to be able to say that we could stop all the drugs from coming into this community. But we were saddled with this severe problem of opioid addiction, thanks to willing collusion, it seems, between pharmacies and drug manufacturers. And fentanyl has just filled this gap whenever the DEA and the feds finally started clamping down over prescribing. Fentanyl has just filled this gap. And so it does take, it may seem strange for a Democrat to say this, but I do think it takes a lot more strenuous border enforcement. But it's a big border, right? And there are a lot of avenues for this stuff to come in. And so I don't want to make it sound like the situation is hopeless. But when you're dealing fentanyl, and I agree firmly when the prosecutor's office goes after somebody, if someone dies of a fentanyl overdose, I have zero problem charging that individual who was dealing that fentanyl with their murder. I think it's totally appropriate to charge someone with be it reckless homicide when someone dies of an overdose and you were the drug dealer that provided this substance that you have no idea of identifying the level of purity or the dosage, and you're willingly providing this product that kills somebody. But again, it takes a willingness for us as parents and as community members to encourage folks who are struggling with addiction to get into treatment. And it can be so difficult and so hard, and so many addicts, unfortunately, who are suffering from addiction fall off the wagon again and again and again, but we can't give up because the alternative is just consigning these people just to die, and I don't believe in that. So I think it's just not one solution. Providing adequate drug abuse resources for those community members, being in our schools and teaching our kids the right way, and aggressive enforcement. And I think the Sheriff's Office is committed to all three.
Judge, I think that leads us to a place that is critical in the family courts, and as part of your jurisdiction, you oversee a lot of family cases, custody, divorce, situations with kids. What are you seeing in the family space, custody space? What's the impact of this increased drug use in the community? We know that drugs stopped at the border are just a fraction of the drugs coming through the border. Just 2022 to 2023, fentanyl seizures in 22 were over 14,000 pounds of fentanyl stopped at the border. In 2023, that number went to 26,000, almost 27,000 pounds of fentanyl stopped at the border, and we know that's just a fraction. I agree with the sheriff. We've got to do a better job at stopping these substances at the border. Once they get into the country, they're finding their way into communities like ours, and eventually then into everyday family life, Judge, and you're seeing that in the family caseload you have. How are you seeing that impact in the family courts and custody matters, and have you seen an impact, an increase in that, or how's that impacting the family courts?
Just this week, I had progress hearings on several post-divorce, post-relationship breaking up issues because one of the parents had a drug problem. I'm sorry to say I had bad news on all the progress reports. My focus is on the best interest of those children. So what I do as a judge, as soon as I can get them out of that home into a safer home, I'm not afraid to use my power to do that. As a civil court, we have to depend upon law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, to go after the bad guys and bad girls, so to speak. But all I can do is look at the cases that come before me in family court, and if there's a drug problem that one of the parents is having, recommend they go into the therapeutic sessions with Southwestern Behavioral, for example, which has a sliding scale for cost of services, very effective and very accessible. Rather than additional recommending that is to get the children out of that situation so that they're not the next generation of abusers. I mean, we don't have great answers, but our focus is on what's in the best interest of that child.
And Winston, as a deputy prosecutor, I moved from drug crimes to then sexual assaults. You mentioned sexual assaults earlier, and I wanted to bring this up in the context of our children. We know that children who grow up in households with drug use in it, they're more likely to be physically or sexually abused. What is the prosecutor's office doing and seeing in regard to drug use, to other kinds of abuse, and how it's impacting our kids?
Yeah, going off what Noah said earlier, drug use and transport is a huge problem in our community. Partly because I think this is somewhat overlooked, is that this is a business, right? The drug empire, it involves other countries. It is a huge source of income, not just for persons, but also companies and countries. And so it is their business to market these highly lethal, dangerous substances to our children, to the citizens of our community. And so it is very calculated. It is very made attractive to our kids, right? And part of that, as Noah alluded to earlier, is that our kids don't know what they're taking these days sometimes. They could be seeking something to help them study, right? Or to help them control whatever mental issues they have. And they could be taking something laced with fentanyl or something worse. You mentioned xylazine. There are other more synthetic drugs that are cheaper to make. They are like, I don't know the exact cost, but virtually pennies to make. And they're getting cheaper and they're getting more dangerous per version that's coming out every year. And I think that is one of those true dangers where we, as parents, as community members, we are afraid legitimately because it is an attack on our children, our community, to make money. It's despicable to say the least, but it is a huge problem because the volumes of these drugs, right? These are made. I think in terms of my personal, we're not talking about Breaking Bad, right? Where people were making these things in their homes. They are, right? But like a large part of the problem is that these are sophisticated manufacturers. These drugs are coming from people who do it for business, who use entire swaths of a country's resources to make these drugs and import them to the United States. And so we have a huge problem because we are seeing high volumes move through our communities, almost helpless to prevent it. And one of the things that we're doing with law enforcement, with the judges, is that we are making it. The prosecutor's goal is to make it as painful as possible for dealers to do business here. I mean, that's really the long and short of it. Is that the drugs are going to be here, right? You know, we can't, at least in terms of our local community, we can't stop these drugs from being shipped around. What we can do is just to say, here in Vanderbilt County, here in Evansville, if you deal drugs and that results in someone's death, there's a statute for that. We will seek incredibly long periods of time for incarceration for you if that happens. Our JTF, right, headed by the incredible Mike Gray, they do a tremendous job. They just had a really big bust earlier this week. They go to the heart of the dealers, right? They surveil, they see they know who's involved in the business, right? And they can target and pick up dealers and people who are involved in the business. And those are people who we are actively looking for and trying to remove. And sending a message throughout saying, like, don't come here, right? If you come here, our law enforcement are on top of their game. And with the court system and with the prosecutors, we're going to make sure that we're doing the most that we can, where we're putting you away for as long as possible to make you no longer a threat to this community. And these dealers are not just coming from here, right? But they're also coming from other states and other jurisdictions. And so that's just a critically important factor to make sure that we take them out for as long as possible. And I want to contrast that with what we've talked about previously, right? Drug treatment court. We're not talking about people who have a problem, either because it's a mental state or, a lot of kids grow up in broken homes, right? They may take up habits that are advisable, but they don't necessarily know better. So those people, I see hope. I see hope in treatment. I see hope in, they should take accountability for their actions, right? And they may see some jail or prison time, but that's not the end of the road for them. What we're looking more after in terms of harsher penalties, more prison jail time, are the dealers. And so that is the distinction we're trying to make, is preserve those who can be saved, ensure that those who actually actively harm our citizens are made to pay.
I appreciate so much this conversation and recognize that we're here over lunch. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank the CCO and Ron and Johnny for hosting us today. We're not going to close on that note. I want to give each of these guys an opportunity quickly in closing to mention something positive or some good news. We've had some rough topics today, but I'm a big believer, and I know that you guys are too, that it takes a village, and it takes the court and the prosecutors and the sheriff's deputies and everybody to ensure that this is the kind of place that families want to move to, stay, and live, and children to return to raise their families. Winston, we'll start with you and work our way down. Some good news out of the prosecutor's office to share with the group in closing.
Yeah, so joint office, so we're about 80 plus people. We have so many facets, from child support to victim advocates to our prosecutors to adult protective services, right? Everyone in office really contributes as a whole to this mission of making sure that Vanderbilt County is safer. We work so closely with law enforcement, practically talking with them every day. As I mentioned, we got the grant last year to do the Crime Gun Intelligence Center. And so that's part of our efforts. I don't want to speak to too many efforts publicly, because we don't necessarily want criminals to know what we're doing. But I do want to say that we have won so many trials, both last year and this year. In fact, I think we won every murder trial that we've had. And I think that's a really good sign that we are pushing the important cases, and we're also doing a great job in prosecuting them to ensure that they are people are held accountable for the worst of those worst offenses. Right? We're taking a serious look at serious crimes, including gun crimes. And drug crimes. We've dedicated prosecutors to JTF and to other aspects of those things. So we're doing a much more targeted approach, and going back to children, which I feel very strongly about, and Prosecutor Mercer feels really strongly about, is that we have created a sort of domestic violence, sex crime, child neglect, death sort of case. And I'm very proud to say that one of our own, Ian Blair, just won a trial yesterday. With a very horrible situation involving a 12-day child who died because partly because his mother was a meth addict. And so it's incredibly tragic, that, as I said, that 12-day-old child has no ability to speak for himself. And so we're essentially doing that job for him, and we're doing that job in the courts, who press us. And I want to thank Judge Shively. During the trial last year, he was very fair, but was also tough on us. And I think that's great, because we do need to be pressed to ensure that we do our jobs properly, so that cases don't come back on appeal, so that nothing, the rights of the defense are respected, but that we also it pushes us to be better. I think that's the most important part, is if we're not pressed to be better, we can't do our best job for the citizens of Vanderbilt County. So we're really excited. We have all kinds of initiatives, which I don't want to mention all of them, but we are really dedicated, and I think our trial results really do reflect that.
Judge Shively, good news.
Great news is there's only two people in this room that remember when we moved into our so-called new courthouse in 1969, myself and Les Hammer. Les, you're probably there for the groundbreaking, right? Well, COVID's not all bad. We had Build America Back money involved. With that money and with the rent the county had been paying to the building authority over the years, we're just completing a $6 million renovation of the entire courthouse at no taxpayer expense. And come the end of this month, it'll all be done. Judge Pigman will be upstairs. He'll have a new courtroom. The whole courts building will have nothing but courtrooms, judges' chambers, and client meeting facilities, and a better place to do business overall. The other good news is the fact that, and this is not recent news, but something that I've become more aware of as a judge. We don't have the acrimony between the prosecutor's office and the judiciary. That was not always the case. The bench and the prosecuting bar get along very well, and there have been some very good examples of that recently. the sheriff was talking about the Joint Task Force fighting drugs. Well, that's in part because it wasn't true so many years ago, but the EPD and the sheriff's office work well together. And you didn't see that. And this is not a plug for Ryan, but he's running for circuit court judge. I'm in Superior Court, and back 25, 30 years ago, the circuit court judge didn't even communicate with the Superior Court judge. We've got a great working relationship. I think it's reflective of this community.
So true. Sheriff?
Well said, Judge. We do have a wonderful working relationship. When I came in, we moved a sheriff deputy over to treatment court to provide a better liaison between our office and our community corrections program. And our treatment court deputy regularly attends some of Judge Shidley's mental health court meetings. So just to keep those lines of communication open and to let them know that we're here to serve the courts. We're here to help them with their programming, and I look forward to partnering with Judge Shidley in the coming months on making sure that his treatment court is adequately funded. Because if he's adequately funded, then our jail population goes down. And so as far as an initiative that I'm very excited about to be rolling out, announced it last year, it's really getting momentum now. We now have sheriff deputies, individual deputies assigned to virtually every neighborhood that's out in the county, outside the corporate limits. So each individual neighborhood will be mailed a postcard with that deputy's picture on it, their email address, and their cell phone number. So if you have a problem that you don't want to call 911 for, an abandoned vehicle or a minor issue that does not require an immediate response, the bar is now so much lower to have contact with the sheriff's office. And you've got a name and a face to put to the person responsible for protecting your neighborhood. And so those deputies will be attending those HOA and those Crime Watch and those neighborhood association meetings. And so it just makes a more approachable sheriff's office and just lowering that bar to entry to make sure that your sheriff's office is imminently approachable and that if you have a problem, we're there to help you with it. And I so look forward to unveiling this map and sending these postcards out in the coming weeks, because I think it's going to be, somebody will probably think it's a political mailer right now, but in fact, it will be a postcard with your sheriff deputy on it. And then we'll keep that phone number. That phone number will be permanently assigned to that neighborhood. So if we have to change out personnel, as happens, retirements, transfers, that number will always remain consistent with that individual neighborhood. And so just having that little postcard on their refrigerator, like, that's someone that I know works at the sheriff's office. I now have my own personal sheriff's deputy, and I'm really looking forward to making that a reality here in the coming weeks.
Before we hand it over to Johnny Kincaid, let's give our panel a round of applause. Johnny, to close us out.
First of all, thank you, all of you. Really appreciate it. Great discussion. I am looking forward to actually inviting all of you to come on and sit down in the podcast studio back here and spend a half hour talking about your what all's going on, because this is information the general public doesn't usually get a chance to hear, and so we want to make sure that people have a chance to hear that, and we're very thankful for all of you. Thank you for coming. We sure appreciate you showing up here today. And I want to say a special thanks to the facility here, which is Citygate. Citygate has been wonderful about opening their doors up for this event. Janet Douglas heads Citygate, and she started a podcast studio recently, and we've been working on building that and growing that and making that something now that's available to other people for podcasting. And so it's actually truly a community facility. We're going to have a new podcast coming up dealing with military heroes with David Jones is going to be hosting that, and I'm looking forward to that podcast being launched soon. Janet Douglas has a podcast from here as well. The other thing I want to mention just very quickly here is that every Tuesday at noon in this room, a small group of people gather purely for the purpose of praying for our community, for our leaders, for you guys, for things that are going on in the community, and that's the only purpose for that group to be here. They pray by name for city council members and county commissioners and so on down the line, because they believe that prayer is part of the mix for a better community. So so they do that every Tuesday, and I'm very, very happy and pleased to be a part of that group, and continuing to find ways that we can that the body of Christ can serve the community. This facility at City Gate is not a church, by the way. It is referred to as an apostolic training center. It is actually here for the purpose of training Christians in being able to reach our community, and in ways that they are more effective as a Christian community. And so they have meetings here on a regular basis. They do conferences here, but this is not a church, and so you don't get a pitch to come here for Sunday service. It's just folks who are learning more and more about God and about how to serve Him better. And with that, I want to bring up Pastor Levon once again to pray for closing here. By the way, I want to mention Levon Dozier is not a part of the team here in this facility. He has his own facility that he oversees, and but he is also working with part of a task force that we're putting together of pastors. That we want to get pastors more involved in the community and in how to improve the community that we live in. Pastor?
Thank you, Johnny. Can we put our hands together for our guests? Again, thank you all for each and every one of you taking time out of your schedule to be a part of this. I was invited to be part as the spiritual side of this panel. I want to thank each one of you as our community leaders. I got to hear your heart from your mouth. I've seen you around, of course, but I got to hear your heart to see that you all have our city's best interest in mind, truly. And from a Christian ethic, we believe that authority is appointed, even though we have elections. The chances of the direction those election goes in, authority is appointed by God. And so for whatever reason you're in your positions or why you've been placed, I believe it's because you hold people's destinies in your hands. And as you guys were sharing in the panel, I felt like the Lord, I hope this language doesn't feel weird, but I'm a pastor. All right, so I felt like the Lord was speaking to me about you, Sheriff Robinson, as I was in my seat. There is an affinity that God has given you towards Him and towards wisdom. And you have been divinely appointed as a gatekeeper, as the sheriff. You are a gatekeeper, but there is an unusual wisdom that God has given you. You may not be a spiritual person. I don't know where you are. I don't know where you stand. But there is an unusual wisdom that God has given you. And I kept hearing the term collaborate. That is how we're going to be able to solve some of the ills of our community locally. But He's given you a wisdom to facilitate, but also a wisdom to articulate where people can hear and understand. It doesn't mean that they have to have a spiritual background, but as it relates to the spheres that they occupy. And before Judge Shively mentioned that you was running for judge, I saw you in positions outside of being a sheriff. And so I don't know how far that goes up the line, but I want you to know that the hand of God is on you specifically. And He wants you to look to Him and to lean into Him. In Luke chapter 21, Jesus releases a end time or prophetic outlook about the political makeup of the world. But one of the things He says specifically, He said that there would be distress of nations with perplexities. The original language of the New Testament is Greek. And in that Greek, that word perplexity simply means problems that cannot be solved by human ingenuity or wisdom. So it is a reminder to all of us, regardless of our skill, our training, that we have to search God. We have to look to someone who is higher than us to give us the ability to solve the issues of our day. Because if we possess the power to truly solve these problems, specifically in Evansville, we would have solved them decades ago. So when we look at the distress of nations and the perplexities, that means that we have to say, God, we need your wisdom. We need the solution. And so for each and every one of us who are in this room, whether it's a civic responsibility that we have or we're in the business realm, we have people's destinies in our hands, and we must look outside of ourselves to tap into those particular solutions for our community. I feel hopeful about our community, about the future of our community. Do you all agree? Would you put your hands together? Do you feel hopeful about our community? All right. And I would like to pray over our leaders. Are there any other community leaders that are in this room? I know there's several. I know we see law. All right, all right. And we have law enforcement. I have with me my wife, but also Jalen Chestnut, who is a minister at our church, and he's a sheriff deputy in Warwick County. So we have several ones. But those of you, I don't know where you stand. I'm not trying to make you feel uncomfortable. But those of you that believe in the power of prayer, would you join with me in prayer as we pray for our leaders? We pray for those who are specifically on this panel, but also those who are in our county, surrounding counties, and our community. If you believe in the power of prayer, join me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this moment in time, for those who took time out of their busy schedules to speak to issues, to bring clarity and understanding concerning the direction of our community. I thank you for every leader that you have appointed and placed in their respective positions. And I pray, Father, that they would search you, that they would lean into you when they've come to the end of their abilities, to the end of their training, to the end of their experiences, that they would know that you have the answer for every problem that humanity faces. I pray, God, you'll bless them, their families, their loved ones. I pray for a greater sensitivity as relates to equity and justice, and that they would begin to move in greater levels of solution-oriented issues that would help solve the problems of our community. I pray for every business leader. I pray for every law enforcement officer. I pray for everyone that's in this room and those that will watch this or the replays, that God, you would help us to be that light and to help those who are struggling, whether it's with mental health or just adverse circumstances that led to a life of crime or a life of violence. We pray, we know that you ascribe value to every human being on this planet. And I pray, Father, that we would have your heart as we look at humanity, and we will not demonize humanity because their circumstances are different than ours. But I pray that whatever capacities you've given us to be a solution and to be a source of light, hope, and strength, Lord, help us to tap into that. We need help above our own strength. And I pray that you will seal these things by your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming very much. We really appreciate it. Glad that you were here. And we'll be in touch about future luncheons with City County Observer. Thank you very much.